inside the Allied war room before D-Day, June 5th, 1944, 4 a.m. In a room at Southwark House in southern England, General Dwight D. Eisenhower stood before a map of the French coast and made the loneliest decision in military history. Outside, a storm raged. The weather was atrocious. Thousands of ships waited in harbour. Over 150,000 men sat in cramped landing craft, seasick and terrified. And Eisenhower had to decide, do we go or do we wait? Welcome back. Today we're taking you inside the Allied war room in the months, weeks and final hours before D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. This isn't just about ships and soldiers. This is about the impossible decisions made in that room, the deceptions that fooled Hitler, the arguments between allies that nearly derailed everything, and the moment when Eisenhower bet everything on a weather forecast. For 2 years, the Allies had been planning Operation Overlord. 2 years of gathering intelligence, building equipment, training troops. 2 years of arguing over where to land, when to land, and how many men would die in the first wave. By early 1944, they had assembled the largest invasion force ever created. But success was far from guaranteed. The Germans knew an invasion was coming. They had fortified the French coast with thousands of bunkers, millions of mines, and entire armies waiting behind the beaches. Hitler called it the Atlantic Wall, an impregnable fortress stretching from Norway to Spain. The Allies had to find its weakest point, land there with overwhelming force, and establish a foothold before German reinforcements could throw them back into the sea. In the next 30 minutes, we'll take you month by month through the planning of D-Day. We'll show you the heated debates between Churchill and Eisenhower over strategy. We'll reveal Operation Fortitude, the elaborate deception that convinced Hitler the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. We'll take you into the weather briefings where meteorologists predicted a brief break in the storms. And we'll show you Eisenhower's final decision, made in that war room at 4:15 a.m. on June 5th, knowing that if he was wrong, the war might be lost. And this is the story of the greatest military operation ever planned, told through the war room where it happened. 1. January 1943, December 1943. The plan takes shape. The Casablanca Conference. January 1943, Casablanca, Morocco. Churchill and Roosevelt met to decide the course of the war. The Soviet Union was bleeding the Wehrmacht white on the Eastern Front, but Stalin was furious. He wanted a second front in Western Europe. Now, he accused the Western Allies of letting Soviet soldiers do all the dying while they took their time. The Americans wanted to invade France in 1943. The British did not. Churchill had bitter memories of amphibious disasters, Gallipoli in World War I, the disastrous Dieppe raid in 1942. He argued that an invasion in 1943 would fail. The Atlantic Wall was too strong. The Luftwaffe still had fighter cover. Germany hadn't been weakened enough. The compromise: invade Sicily and Italy in 1943 to knock Italy out of the war and gain experience in amphibious operations. Then prepare for a massive invasion of France in 1944. Cossack. The first plans. In March 1943, British Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan was appointed Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander, Cossacci. His job: plan the invasion of France. There was just one problem. There was no Supreme Allied Commander yet. Morgan was planning an operation for a commander who didn't exist, with resources he didn't have, for a date that hadn't been set. Morgan's planners worked in Norfolk House in London, the first Allied war room dedicated to Overlord. They faced enormous questions: where to land. The French coast stretched for hundreds of miles. Each sector had advantages and disadvantages. Pas-de-Calais was closest to England and to Germany, only 20 miles across the Channel. But the Germans knew this and had heavily fortified it. Normandy was further from English ports and from Germany, but less defended. Brittany had excellent ports but was too far west. How many men? The initial assault would need to overwhelm the beach defences quickly. But you couldn't land everyone at once. The beaches were only so wide, troops would be vulnerable to artillery fire. How do you balance speed of landing with survivability? When to land? You needed a low tide so that beach obstacles would be visible, but you also needed high tide so landing craft wouldn't get stuck on sandbars. You needed a full moon so paratroopers could see their drop zones. You needed dawn so you had a full day to establish the beachhead. There were only a few days each month when all these conditions aligned. The plan emerges by July 1943. Morgan's team had produced the initial plan. They recommended land in Normandy. The beaches there, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword, offered a reasonable compromise between German defences and proximity to ports. Drop airborne forces behind the beaches to disrupt German reinforcements. Land 3 divisions in the first wave, expand to 8 divisions within 48 hours. But there was a critical weakness. Morgan didn't have enough landing craft for a larger assault. The Americans were prioritizing the Pacific War. The British were still involved in the Mediterranean. Landing craft production couldn't keep up with demand. Churchill reviewed the plan and said, "This is not enough. 3 divisions will not break through. We need at least 5 divisions in the first wave." But where would the landing craft come from? Tehran. The Big Three, November 1943. Tehran, Iran. Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin met face-to-face for the first time. Stalin was blunt. "When is Overlord happening? I need a date." Roosevelt promised. "May 1st, 1944. Stalin nodded. "Then I will launch a massive offensive in the east at the same time. Germany will face 2 fronts simultaneously and cannot reinforce either." Churchill still had doubts. He suggested alternative operations in the Mediterranean or the Balkans. Stalin cut him off. "I don't care about the Balkans. I care about France. You promised a second front. Deliver it." Roosevelt sided with Stalin. The decision was final. Overlord would happen in May 1944 in Normandy with overwhelming force. Eisenhower takes command December 1943. Dwight D. Eisenhower was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. He would lead Overlord. The job was poisoned chalice. If the invasion succeeded, the credit would be shared among all the Allies. If it failed, Eisenhower alone would be blamed. Eisenhower arrived in London in January 1944 and immediately reviewed Morgan's plan. His response? "It's too small. We need 5 divisions in the first assault, not 3. And the front needs to be wider. We need to include the Cotentin Peninsula and secure Cherbourg's port facilities quickly." Eisenhower's chief subordinates agreed. General Bernard Montgomery, commanding Allied ground forces, was emphatic. "3 divisions will be slaughtered on those beaches. We need overwhelming force in the first wave." Eisenhower made his demand. "Fine me the landing craft. Delay D-Day if necessary, but I want 5 divisions hitting those beaches on D-Day." The new target date? Early June 1944. January-May 1944. The deception Operation Fortitude. The Allies had a huge advantage. They had broken German codes. Ultra-intelligence intercepts told them exactly what Hitler believed. And what Hitler believed was that the invasion would come at Pas-de-Calais, the shortest route across the Channel, the quickest path to Germany. The Allies decided to reinforce this belief through the most elaborate deception operation in military history, Operation Fortitude. The plan had 2 parts: Fortitude North, make Hitler believe an invasion of Norway was coming. This would tie down German divisions in Scandinavia that might otherwise go to France. Fortitude South. Make Hitler believe the main invasion would hit Calais, not Normandy. Even after the Normandy landings began, convince him that Normandy was just a diversion and the real invasion was still coming at Calais. The Phantom Army. The centerpiece of Fortitude South was FUSAG, the 1st United States Army Group. On paper, it was a massive force of 50 divisions stationed in southeast England opposite Calais. It had tanks, trucks, headquarters, radio traffic, supply depots, everything a real army would have. Except it didn't exist. FUSAG was a phantom. The tanks were inflatable rubber decoys. The supply depots were empty warehouses. The radio traffic was scripted transmissions designed to be intercepted. The headquarters staff were clerks with no actual divisions to command. And commanding this phantom army, General George S. Patton. The Germans feared Patton more than any other Allied general. They couldn't imagine the Allies would waste Patton on a diversion. If Patton was in southeast England, that's where the invasion must be coming. German reconnaissance aircraft flew over England and photographed the Fusag installations. German agents in England, all of whom had been captured and turned into double agents by British intelligence, sent reports confirming Fusag's existence. Hitler looked at the intelligence and concluded, "The invasion will come at Calais. Patton will lead it. We must keep strong forces there to stop him." The War Room debates. While the deception played out, the real war room at Southwick House near Portsmouth was the scene of intense debates. Allied commanders gathered around massive maps and argued over every detail. Churchill wanted a simultaneous invasion of southern France to draw German forces away from Normandy. Eisenhower refused. He didn't have enough landing craft for 2 invasions. Montgomery wanted a narrow front focused on capturing Caen quickly. American generals wanted a broader front to prevent the entire force from being bottlenecked. They compromised. A 50-mile front across 5 beaches. Air Force commanders wanted to focus bombing on German industry and transportation. Eisenhower insisted on bombing French railways to prevent German reinforcements from reaching Normandy. After heated arguments, Eisenhower won. The transportation plan went into effect. French railways were systematically destroyed. The French resistance. In France, the resistance received coded messages from London. "The dice are on the table. Prepare for D-Day." Thousands of French men and women prepared to rise up, sabotage German communications, and attack supply lines once the invasion began. But they didn't know when or where the invasion would land. For security, even the resistance wasn't told. They would only know when they heard specific coded messages on BBC radio. The security nightmare. Keeping Overlord secret was a nightmare. Over 2 million people in Britain knew something about the invasion. American soldiers talked in pubs. British officers discussed plans in clubs. Any leak could alert the Germans to the real target. Security was extreme. In the weeks before D-Day, the British sealed off southern England. No one could enter or leave without special authorization. Mail was censored. Phone calls were monitored. Even Allied diplomats were restricted from travelling. In April, a US officer drunkenly mentioned Overlord details at a party. He was immediately court-martialed and reduced in rank. The message was clear. Loose lips would not be tolerated. May 1944. Final preparations. The practice runs. Throughout April and May, Allied forces conducted practice invasions on British beaches. The most important was Exercise Tiger on April 28th. American troops practiced landing on Slapton Sands, which resembled Utah Beach. It was a disaster. German E-boats intercepted, the convoy sinking 2 LSTs, landing ship, tank, and damaging another. Over 700 American soldiers died, more than would die on Utah Beach on D-Day itself. Worse, several officers involved in the exercise had knowledge of the real invasion plans. If the Germans had captured any of them alive, Overlord could have been compromised. The Allied command held its breath for days. Had the Germans captured anyone? Had they learned the real target? Ultra-intelligence revealed nothing. Either the Germans hadn't captured anyone or they hadn't realized what they had. The secret held. The airborne debate. Air Force commanders fought a last battle with Eisenhower. They believed the airborne drops behind the beaches were suicide. The paratroopers would be scattered, disorganized, slaughtered by German defenders. British Air Marshal Lee Mallory told Eisenhower, "The airborne operation will result in 70% casualties. It's a waste of elite troops." Eisenhower listened, then made his decision. "The airborne drops go ahead as planned. We need to disrupt German communications and hold key bridges. The paratroopers stay in the plan." Lee Mallory saluted and left. He would later apologize to Eisenhower. The airborne drops succeeded far beyond his predictions. The final briefings. In late May, the troops were sealed into camps. They were shown maps, aerial photos, scale models of the beaches. Every bunker, every obstacle, every German position was marked. The soldiers studied the defences they would face. Many wrote final letters home, knowing they might not survive. In the war room, Eisenhower and his commanders finalized every detail. They had backup plans for every contingency. What if the Germans detected the invasion fleet en route? What if the airborne drops failed? What if beach defenses were stronger than expected? What if? They had done everything possible. Now they just needed the weather to cooperate. June 4, the weather crisis. 19 and 24:30, the narrow window. D-Day required specific conditions. Low tide at dawn, full moon the night before, calm seas, good visibility, and low winds. These conditions only aligned for a few days in early June, June 5th, 6th, and 7th. After that, the tides would be wrong for nearly 2 weeks. If they missed this window, the invasion would have to be delayed until late June. But by then, the long days and short nights would favour German defenders, and 150,000 men couldn't be kept secret and ready indefinitely. Early June was the window. They had to go then, or the entire operation might unravel. The storm. On June 1st, the weather forecast was good. Eisenhower gave the preliminary order, begin loading troops onto ships. The invasion would launch on June 5th. But on June 3rd, the forecast changed. A massive storm system was moving into the English Channel. The meteorologist predicted high winds, rough seas, low cloud cover, exactly the conditions that would make an amphibious invasion impossible. On June 4th, the storm hit with full force. Rain lashed southern England. Wind howled. Waves in the channel reached 6 feet. Ships already loaded with troops rocked violently. Soldiers were seasick before they even left harbour. Eisenhower called an emergency meeting at 4 a.m. on June 4th in the War Room at Southwick House. The 4 a.m. meeting. The room was thick with cigarette smoke. Coffee cups littered the table. Maps covered the walls. Around the table sat the most powerful military commanders in the world: Eisenhower, Montgomery, Admiral Bertram Ramsay commanding naval forces, Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory commanding air forces. Group Captain James Stagg, chief meteorologist, entered and delivered his forecast. The storm will continue through June 5th. Seas will be too rough for landing craft. Cloud cover will prevent air support. I cannot recommend proceeding. The room fell silent. Eisenhower asked, "What about June 6th? Stagg hesitated. "There may be a brief break in the weather on June 6th, a window of calmer conditions, but it's uncertain. The storm system is unpredictable." Montgomery spoke. "We've trained for this. The men are ready, but I cannot ask them to land in a storm." Ramsay agreed. "Many landing craft will swamp in these seas. We'll lose men before they even reach the beaches." Eisenhower made his decision. "We'll postpone 24 hours. We meet again tomorrow at 4 a.m. Stagg, I need a better forecast." The order went out. D-Day postponed to June 6th. But this created a new crisis. Some ships had already sailed. They had to be recalled. The fleet was dispersed across multiple ports. Could everyone be ready to launch again in 24 hours? The tension mounts. June 4th was agony. The storm raged. Soldiers sat in landing craft, soaked and miserable. The tight security meant they couldn't be offloaded. They had seen the maps. They knew the target. They had to stay sealed in camps or on ships. Eisenhower visited some of the troops. He talked to paratroopers who would drop behind the beaches. Many were teenagers. He looked at their faces and thought, "I'm sending these boys to their deaths. Am I making the right decision?" In the war room, staff officers worked through the night. They calculated fuel consumption, ammunition supplies, coordination of air support. Everything depended on the weather forecast for June 6th. The 4:15 a.m. decision. June 5th, 4 a.m. Eisenhower entered the war room for the most important meeting of his life. Everyone stood. He gestured for them to sit. Stagg entered. Every eye turned to him. "Gentlemen," Stagg said, "I believe there will be a break in the weather on June 6th. The storm system is moving faster than predicted. We should have 36 hours of acceptable conditions. Not perfect, but acceptable. Seas will be rough, but manageable. Cloud cover will break enough for air support. It's a narrow window, but it's there." Eisenhower turned to his commanders. "Opinions?" Montgomery: "I say go. We'll never have perfect conditions. This is as good as we'll get." Ramsay: "The Navy can launch. It won't be pleasant, but we can do it." Lee Mallory. "The Air Force needs better visibility, but we can operate with what Stagg is predicting." Eisenhower stood and walked to the window. Outside, rain still fell, wind still howled. He had to imagine that storm breaking, had to trust Stagg's forecast. The entire invasion, 2 years of planning, millions of tons of equipment, the hopes of enslaved Europe, came down to this one man's decision, based on one meteorologist's prediction about a brief break in a storm. At 4:15 a.m., Eisenhower turned back to the room. "Okay," he said quietly. "We'll go." June 5th. The final hours. The die is cast. The order went out. Operation Overlord is a go. D-Day is June 6th, 1944. There was no turning back now. The fleet would launch throughout June 5th. Over 5,000 ships would cross the channel during the night. The armada was too large to recall. If Stagg was wrong about the weather, the invasion would fail. Thousands would die. Eisenhower drafted 2 statements, one for success, one for failure. The failure statement read, "Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based upon the best information available. The troops, the air and the navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone." He dated it July 5th by mistake, then corrected it to June 5th. His hand was shaking. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. The airborne departs. Throughout June 5th, paratroopers and glider troops prepared to launch. These men would be the first to land in France, dropped behind the beaches hours before the amphibious forces arrived. Eisenhower visited the 101st Airborne at their airfield. He walked among the men, chatting casually, inspecting their equipment. The paratroopers sensed his tension. They tried to reassure him. One soldier called out, "Don't worry, General. We'll take care of this." Eisenhower smiled, but his eyes were haunted. He later said that moment, watching those young men board their aircraft knowing many wouldn't come back, was the hardest of his life. At 11:20 p.m. on June 5th, the first aircraft took off. The airborne invasion had begun. The fleet sails. Throughout June 5th, ships departed from ports across southern England. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, landing craft, minesweepers, over 5,000 vessels in total. The largest invasion fleet ever assembled. The English Channel was rough. Men vomited into helmets, landing craft took on water, but the fleet kept moving. Navigation was critical. In the darkness and rough seas, ships could easily collide or get lost. Above, Allied aircraft flew 14,000 sorties, bombing German defences, dropping paratroopers, protecting the fleet. Allied fighter cover was so complete that the Luftwaffe barely appeared. Hitler sleeps. In Germany, Hitler went to bed early on the night of June 5th. He was convinced no invasion was imminent. The weather was too bad. His commanders in France reported rough seas and high winds. "No one would invade in this weather," Hitler said. "We can relax." This would be one of the most catastrophic miscalculations in military history. The Atlantic Wall defenders did detect the invasion fleet. Radar stations picked up massive ship formations, but the storm had disrupted German communications. Messages took hours to reach high command, and German commanders hesitated to wake Hitler without confirmation. By the time Hitler was woken with news of the invasion, it was too late. The Atlantic Wall had been breached. The message to the world. At dawn on June 6th, Allied radio stations broadcast to the world. Under the command of General Eisenhower, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. In the war room at Southwick House, staff officers tracked reports coming in from the beaches. Utah Beach, successful landing. Omaha Beach, heavy resistance, high casualties. Gold Beach, proceeding as planned. Juno Beach, Canadians pushing inland. Sword Beach, British forces consolidating. The invasion was working. Stagg's forecast had been right. The weather window had opened. The Germans had been caught by surprise. By nightfall, 156,000 Allied troops were ashore in France. The Atlantic Wall had been broken. Aftermath and reflection, the price. D-Day cost approximately 10,000 Allied casualties, including 4,414 confirmed dead. This was far fewer than predicted. The planners had feared 20,000 or more casualties. The deception had worked. The Germans had kept strong forces at Calais, waiting for Patton's Phantom Army. By the time they realised Normandy was the real invasion, it was too late. Eisenhower's burden. Years later, Eisenhower reflected on that 4:15 a.m. decision. I knew that if the invasion failed, I would be responsible. That's what command means. You make the decisions and you accept the consequences. I've never been so alone as I was in that moment. The War Room's legacy. The Allied War Room where Overlord was planned no longer exists in the same form, but its legacy is profound. It was there that the free world decided to confront tyranny with the largest military operation ever mounted. It was there that complex logistics became reality, that inter-Allied rivalry was overcome, that bold deception fooled Hitler. Most importantly, it was there that one man had to make the loneliest decision of the war, trusting a weather forecast and betting everything on one throw of the dice. D-Day succeeded because of careful planning, Allied cooperation, brilliant deception, and courage. But it also succeeded because of one man's willingness to make the hard decision at 4:15 a.m. on June 5, 1944, and take responsibility for whatever came next. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the Allied War Room before D-Day. If you found this video informative, please like, subscribe, and share. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you think Eisenhower made the right decision? What would you have done? Let's discuss. Until next time, remember, history's greatest moments often come down to single decisions made by individuals willing to bear the burden of command. Stay curious and never forget the price of freedom.